On the 23rd of May 2021, we welcomed Esther de Waal as our speaker for the latest in our talks to celebrate the 50th anniversary of the founding of the lay community of Saint Benedict. I just wanted to hold up my copy of Seeking God, which I've had since 1984 and which has been accompanied me in my spiritual development as a lay Benedictine. So it's just wonderful that you're here with us tonight. And I'm going to let Mike introduce you. Mike, I'll pass over to you.
Okay, thank you. Well, we don't see anything of Esther now in our kitchen because she's moved to Oxford. And sadly, that is quite a long way from her beloved Rolleston. But it is very good for her to be nearer to her family. I first encountered Esther also with her groundbreaking book, Seeking God, in the 1980s. I think Adam's looked after his a bit more carefully than possibly I have. But up close, we go back to the Saturday of the first Thomas Merton Society conference in 1996 in Southampton. I had travelled from Wales not knowing what to expect, but quickly realised that this was a warm and loving meeting of interested minds and not the personality cult that I feared it might have been. I was told very quickly, "You must meet Esther, she lives near you." I was a bit stunned as I assumed she lived in Canterbury or Oxford. But before I had a chance to feel nervous, we were discussing the unique borderland of England and Wales, friends we had in common, and exchanging details. Later, we found that we were both paid up members of the O'Donoghue Family Appreciation Society, Esther having met them and formed a strong relationship in Ethiopia, Eritrea. Esther's cottage was something completely else. Oh, this is the photo from the back of the book. I just had to bring this one in because I mean not that much has changed really. Esther's cottage was something completely else. I've never known a place with a plum orchard, a waterfall, and a real life hermit in its grounds. But this was where Esther truly lived. It was unique, and inside and outside it holds memories of wonderful suppers and tea parties with a stream of children, pets, and fascinating guests and neighbours. She is the embodiment of hospitality. Esther's always had this gift for friendship, and that extended into, I would say, conquering America for St. Benedict. I think it was a little bit like the Beatles going there, because America already had plenty of monks and nuns, but Esther helped them to make outside connections they hadn't imagined possible and paved a way for many to walk after her as she spoke here, there, and everywhere on a long and winding itinerary of visits, which led to many Americans coming over to see the monastic sources in Britain and Ireland for themselves. Esther is a fearless and intrepid woman. She made light of losing all her luggage once on a flight to Syria, and she was way calmer than me as we drove through serious floods one late afternoon to get to Dowie Abbey for a Monos conference. And Esther is a woman for detail. She avoids loose generalizations to home in on specifics of Benedictine life, often backed up by a reference to the rule, which she has opened up for us so beautifully by her commentary titled The Life-Giving Way, as well as her numerous other books. I've experienced several of her talks over the years, and she will always find a fresh angle or connection. So I'm sure her reflection this evening will both delight and intrigue us. Esther, please.
Michael, what an introduction. First of all, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. That's lovely.
Loud and clear. Well, it's a great thing to have the chance to talk about St. Benedict and the way of St. Benedict. It really is. And it's quite clear to me that the Benedictine world is alive and flourishing. And to judge by the recent output of the last 3 years, And here I have in front of me 3 books. This man I'll call Luigi because I can't really pronounce his surname. Then there is the book familiar to us all by Rowan, and then there is the book by Laurentia Johns. So here we have, in the first place, an Italian abbot who is now an Anglican priest in London, a nun from Stanbrook in Worth in Yorkshire, and an Anglican retired archbishop having the sense to come and live in Wales. So there is riches enough. And Rowan even wrote an article for the Oldie, which shows that Benedictine charism is really reaching out. But then what's going on the other side of the Atlantic? A man called Rod Dreher has written a book called Benedictine Option. I haven't read it and I have no intention of reading it, but it's been reviewed in the tablet, and we realize that this is a really right-wing fundamentalist telling us all to head for the hills and bunker down in the face of contemporary society. And I'm glad to say that he is being answered by a book called not Benedictine Option, but Benedictine Options. And that is by Patrick Henry, and it will be published in the next few months. And it will be a resounding response to Rod Dreher's right-wing fundamentalist use of the rule. So there can be no doubt that the rule of St. Benedict is alive and making itself known in all sorts of various ways. And it's not really surprising when we think of how it all began, those opening words, "Listen, my son, listen carefully, my son." How marvelous that opening is. And once we're realizing that we are in the hands of a master, we are in the hands of a father, it is arresting and it is tender. And you realize that you're hooked as soon as you pick it up. And that was how it began for me, and I can be quite specific about it. The year was 1980. The place was Canterbury, or to be more specific, actually, Canterbury Deanery. One of the advantages, or sometimes disadvantage, but generally advantages of being the wife of an Anglican priest is that you have a tied cottage that goes with the job. My husband was the Dean of Canterbury. I was living in the deanery. In the Middle Ages, the deanery had been the prior's lodging of the Middle Ages. At the Reformation, and I wish that this were more commonly recognized amongst the Anglican cathedrals which have Benedictine roots. At the Reformation, the prior and monks become the dean and chapter of the new Anglican foundation. And so there's a direct handover between the prior and the dean. And it was that which led me to explore the Benedictine monastic ruins around me and the remnants of the past glories of one of the greatest Benedictine communities in medieval England. It wasn't difficult. I was surrounded by the bakehouse, the brewhouse. One exciting day, I went and explored the underground tunnels, which had carried the pipes carrying water to the monastery, the work of a pioneering expert prior in hydraulic engineering. That made a huge impression on me, for the walls of those tunnels were of stone carved and laid with much care and attention, as if they had been for the chapel of Our Lady Undercroft. And yet, by definition, nobody would ever see the work down there in the depths of the earth. So this is how I became determined to discover more about the Benedictine way. And I picked up the Rule of St. Benedict, and I was so grateful that it was small and it was short. It was small because it was pocket-sized. And that is one of the nice connections that I only realized I hadn't ever talked about or thought about for many years. One of the customs of Anglican cathedrals, which have Benedictine roots, is that they allocate an abbot of some existing Benedictine community to be their prior. Prior of Canterbury then was Bernard Orchard from Ealing Abbey. And he dipped into his pocket and produced his own copy of the rule. It was a Bolton translation, and gave it to me. And that was how I first encountered the rule. And that was the beginning of discovering the riches, the enormous riches, the treasure house, and the way that if you pick up the rule, it will change your life. The opening words, as I said a moment ago, listen. Just recently, there's been quite a lot of attention to a book by someone called Catherine Murray. I haven't read it, but there have been considerable number of review articles about it, and that I think is significant in itself. She gives us some rather curious figures. I think they're rather spurious, but never mind, they're significant in a way, because she says that the time given to listening has halved in recently. She says that 1 in 5 Britons are lonely, and that is because they have no one to listen to them. She says that listening is what unifies us as human beings. She says listening is similar to meditation, or rather pretentious perhaps, but it affirms what we know, that Benedict recognized it, that listening is foundational to all personal relationships. And so the rule opens with that word, listen, what Damasus Winzen calls a trumpet call. And then it goes on, if you hear his voice today, do not harden your hearts. Listen with the ear of your heart. The totality of listening, how familiar that all is to us, and how wonderful. And then listen, my son. If there's one thing it's certain, it is that Benedict is steeped in scripture. I believe you can actually count the quotations. I think something like 426, but I may have invented that. You can find the biblical references, but that isn't the real thing. There is a biblical accent. We have to take into account that this is the wisdom tradition which is woven into the rule, and that we're given images, we're given illusions. And my son is a supreme example of this. The illusion is lost by Henrietta's daughter, even though I know that in the States, feminist Benedictines like Joan Chichester or Judith Sutera would be prefacing it by my daughter, my son, the beloved son, the prodigal son. Now I owe this idea, this interpretation to Damasus Winzen, who fled Nazi Germany, went to America, founded the community of Mount Savior in upstate New York. And this comes from an address that he gave to his community, so that each of us is addressed as the prodigal, and at once we're inserted into the story of the prodigal, that story that is told time and again and lived time and again by all of us, not once, but time and time again in our lives. And looking at that story, there are 3 significant moments. The son, myself, yourself, comes to himself. He listens, he goes into the depths of his heart, and there he listens and he hears, and he responds to what he hears when he comes to his senses and repents and makes the start of the return journey which will bring him home to his Father. So there is already listening, metanoia, and stability, and of course the central role of the Father, the loving and forgiving Father. Now, although this is a document to help order life in community, it is also intensely personal. I suspect there will be many others too, who are going to find that they end their lives living on their own, needing the rule to sustain me in my solitary state, which is what I would never have chosen. But what have I learned about energy from this? Why do I return time and again to find new emphasis, new perspectives in the rule that I cling to as the pointer in my life? All the different approaches of recent years are very stimulating to my delight. I found that there are different descriptions of the prologue. Dame Laurentia Johns, who is from, as I think I said, a nun of Stanbrook at Was, has 3 definitions of what she sees. You can define the prologue: a route planner, sketching out our relationship to God. Yes, I like that. A heart workout. Yes, I like it, though I wouldn't use that phrase. I'd think of our heart being enlarged. And then an annunciation, an invitation to be drawn into God's saving plan for mankind. I haven't yet fully reached that. David Parry says that the prologue is an experienced teacher talking to a troubled student. That doesn't appeal to me. But Patrick Barry does. A conversation, he says, Benedict looking into the eyes of the individual before him and speaking in a direct, intimate way. And then a thoroughly academic one, emphasis to be found only probably in academic footnotes. The prologue is part of a baptismal catechesis based on a homily for those about to be baptized. And I was so taken with this idea that I did write a book using the prologue to prepare as a means of preparation for renewing our baptismal vows at the Easter Vigil. Now, all these overlap, of course, but they serve a purpose if they encourage me to ask myself what role the rule is playing now, today, as I search out its peculiar inspiration and as it changes throughout time. I first read it when I had 4 sons living at home, and that was family life. That was very different. That was the emphasis of a community then. Now it is the emphasis of a solitary. But I've been very particularly grateful to the rule by this strange time dictated by COVID. Time is so strange. It seemed to go so fast and yet then so slowly, and nothing seemed to be showing for it. So it was a consolation that the prologue showed me both urgency, are you hastening towards your heavenly home, and patience, patientia, the last sentence of the prologue. It shows me that time has a continuum through which growth can occur and will be solved in the end. Then what I needed more than anything else was structure. I saw nobody. I was allowed out for an hour's walk in the day. And I turned to the wisdom of Benedict in his emphasis on the role of body and mind and spirit, a lifesaver to impose an outline of the day. The prayer as the trellis, if you like, on which everything else depended. The morning spent working, reading, writing, the afternoons going for a walk, and then time for leisure. That wonderful balance really, really kept me sane and kept me full of energy in a strange sort of way. And the image for that, I take one of my favorite images of all, the image of the cloisters. The heart of the monastic complex in the Middle Ages was not, as most people would assume, the church, but the cloisters. And the cloisters, round the cloisters, every day, the monk or the nun would walk, paying attention to the physical, moving between the dormitory and the refectory, paying attention to the mind, the scriptorium, the library, but the whole thing anchored in prayer, which was the church at the baseline of the cloisters. And at the heart of the cloisters, a fountain, always a fountain, a spring of water, the symbol of life-flowing water, the spirit. That was an unconsciously written into my mind or into my heart during those COVID days. Then one of the difficulties about COVID was that it seemed to be endlessly depressing news bulletins. It was draining of other people's energy. And here, verse 9 of the prologue had a role to play. Arise from sleep. Lassitude can become so dangerous. And then come the phrase, which is so much better in Latin, apertis oculis, attonitus oribus, those lovely sharp sounds. And attonitus suggests thunderstruck, gives the idea of energy. And then the light that comes from God, rather flat translation of RB80. Actually, the adjective has more active sense. The light that makes us nearer, makes us closer to God. A wonderful passage, this, with resonance of the Transfiguration, and where to experience nothing less than the message that we are to be awakened, we are to be fully alive, eyes open in astonishment, ears attentive. This was a great thing to have to use as a phrase to encourage me to do precisely that, to have my eyes wide open and to be ready to be astonished. Went out for my walks. I'd got Merton's book on solitude, where he in his habit had looked at things that were so ordinary and yet in his hands became quite extraordinary. A pile of logs, a battered jug, the underleaf of a leaf. Writing, as he said, looking at these things with tenderness and with wonder. Now, I'm not an oblate yet, it's not too late. I belong to a number of communities where I feel I'm accepted as a sister. Back in Normandy, much loved of Anselm, where the brothers and the sisters live at one and other end of the valley. Holy Cross in America, an Anglican Benedictine monastery up the Hudson River, where I'm a companion, which means that I can sit next to the men in choir. Collegeville, Minnesota, where unbelievably I've been given an honorary degree, and that I feel makes me a daughter. I don't want to belong to either an Anglican or a Roman Catholic community. I want to draw my love and prayers from both sides. And so I don't take the vows as such, but I do take promises to help me on the road. And the promises that I make are, first of all, stability, which I love. When I think of stability, I picture myself in Canterbury crypt. I picture the strength of the pillars, the Romanesque pillars, holding up the whole structure above, knowing that unless there was strength there, anything built above would simply collapse. So this is foundational, this is central. All the words which have the sense of being rooted, being earthed, stability, not running away, sitting alongside the other, as Rowan would say, but now the other becomes myself, and trying to escape or run away, face up to things that are in the dark that have to be faced, accepting myself and saying, Shushupe me, the words that a novice says on entering the community, accept me, uphold me, support me, and I shall live. This is perseverance, this is fortitude, this is hanging in there. Dom David Knowles, writing about St. Bernard, but I think writing about himself, says, fortitude is as essential a part of the Christian character as humility. I love stability. I love conversatio morum. It's metanoia, it's rooted, it's readiness to change. It's vital to hold it in tension with stability, because the Benedictine vows, I don't think are like 3 knots in a Franciscan or a Dominican girdle. They all have to be one relating to the other. So conversatio morum, preventing me from letting stability ever come static, the wrong sort of being still, even turning into a pillar of thought. Instead, conversatio morum means change in a very ordinary sense often, just a matter of somehow keeping on, a continual bending of one's life back to God, whatever happens. That's a quotation which I've been extremely grateful in its ordinariness and its simplicity. It comes from a letter from a Malling Abbey, the Anglican Benedictine community in Kent. Sometimes conversatio morum just means just going on when there is neither the inward nor the outward circumstances seem to support one. That's the mystery of the vows, is their interdependence, the way they help one another. Conversatio morum helped me through the most stressful time, that of letting go of a whole way of life and moving to a new. I'm glad that Michael showed you what the cottage was like. You would see that it was completely magical and wonderful. When the time came to give it up, it wasn't easy, and to move to a 2-bedroom flat in Oxford, however nice Oxford is. And here I found enormous help in chapter 32 of the rule, where there is that example of the abbot handing out the tools to the brothers. I think for myself, instead, Christ holds the place of the abbot. The abbot, Christ hands out the tools, the good things, and they are on loan. They are not mine to hold on to, they are on loan, and I am responsible for them, to nurture them, and until the time when, as it were, harvesting has come, they have reached their moment of fulfillment, and then I hang them back. And as it came time to leave the cottage, I found something that Donald Nicol had written, or told me, I think, very helpful indeed. Donald Nicol, who Rowan refers to in passing as that Roman Catholic teacher. He said, go round your house and look at all your possessions and touch them and just say, not mine, but just on loan, not mine, but simply on loan. Then he said, do the same thing with the people in your life. Pre-colligenda, let them come until their fulfillment. So moving on, and then the third of the vows or promises to me, we come back to listening of sculpture. Listening, it all began with listening to a master, listening to a father, and it ends with observing God's instructions and God's teaching through the whole. And the whole of the prologue is a tapestry in which the word is the thread weaving in and out. So many quotations that one can always choose one's favorite ones. The word shakes us awake in the morning. At the structural center of the prologue, says Luigi, comes, let us set out with the gospel for our guide. And there it is, listening with the ear of the heart. Or it can be to attend or to incline. So I think an image here of listening, I think the perfect example of what this can mean in the Rublev Trinity icon. If you recall it, and I'm sure we can all picture it, the bodies inclining towards one another, the hair drawn back from the ears as they listen to one another, and above all, the listening eyes. Here is an image of what listening can be. These three promises, vows, show profound wisdom. They really do. They show a grasp of the human psyche. They show an understanding of psychological depths. Stability. Don't run away from the demons in your depths. Conversatio. Get on with self-knowledge. Listening to your own self. That's all great, but that's not the place to stop. All these vows, these promises, point us towards Christ, Christus Victor. Stability is Christ, the rock on whom I build. Conversatio is Christ, the way I follow. Obedience, Christ, the word. and we gather them all up in that wonderful prayer of the novice being accepted into the community. Shushupe may uphold me. Now, the renewal of my promises, which I take in my own terms, I do it in terms of questions to myself. Am I committed to Benedict's way of life? And then conversatio, am I changing? And as I change, am I becoming daily a more loving person? I remember so vividly a long, long lecture, and it was actually very tedious in the States by a very learned Benedictine scholar. And only in the last 5 minutes did he say something which was so brilliantly, wonderfully, amazingly simple. He said, that is a question that we should all, if we're following the way of Benedict, ask ourselves at the end of every day. Have I today become a more loving person? And finally, listening. And the question here I ask myself is, am I listening to the voices of a suffering world, both the human and the non-human? They vary each year, different questions, different places where I go to, as it were, find a chapel or a quiet place to do a little quiet ritual of my own. But whatever it is, it does mean that I try to grow. And it is Christ-centered growth. The love of Christ must come before all else. And that is really my ending, except because it's Pentecost today. I want to add a little coda, because Benedict is very keen that we observe the rhythm of the liturgical year. The Opus Dei is at the heart of all our lives. The place of the Psalms is woven into all our lives. And so I just want to read some of the 2 verses from the Psalm that came into the Psalm that I read for Pentecost this morning. Bless the Lord, my soul. Lord God, how great you are, clothed in majesty and glory, wrapped in light as in a robe. I will sing to the Lord all my life, make music to my God while I live. May my thoughts be pleasing to him. So thank you for your time. And now I'm here.
Esther, thank you so much for a wonderful, wonderful talk. I'm sure there'll be many responses and questions, but wow, thank you so much. Fascinating. Adam and Barbara, please.
Thank you so much, Esther, for that wonderful talk. Very inspiring, deeply moving as well. My question is about Saint Benedict and young people. So there's a tremendous, let's say, growth of interest in St. Thomas Aquinas, scholasticism. There's always been a great interest in St. Ignatius. And as you quite rightly showed, there's a wonderful literature now of amazing writers, like the book by Rowan is just fantastic. But my question is, do you think that there is a younger generation of people who are growing up to be fans of St. Benedict and knowing him and discovering him and loving him? And maybe what can we do to, let's say, be people who pass on the message about St. Benedict to younger people?
I'm living in now in a surrounded by in a retirement flat where there are 90 people, average the age of 80. I'm not in immediate contact with what the young are thinking. Benedict has got so much to tell anyone who is setting out to discover things about themselves and a self-awareness. And it'll have to be your generation, who reach out to them.
Thank you very much. So you've definitely given us so much food of thought of things that we can use to inspire young people with, definitely.
Janet Lee says, responding to Adam's question, Esther's comment in the 3 vows, especially stability, seems a good place to start. So.
Yes, because I thought that Esther spoke very clearly about those 3 vows and how she understood them. And although she said, it doesn't end with stability, I thought the image of Canterbury Cathedral, having been there many times myself, my daughter lives in Canterbury, and the pillars and one thing or another, I thought it was a good place to start. For many people of all ages, but I think this is true with young people as well, stability is something we are searching for, and I think I think that's a good place to start. But also, I do the rule on TikTok, obviously. Thank you.
Thank you.
That's great. That's great. Yes.
Austin, got a question.
Hello. Good evening, everybody. Hi, Esther. Thank you so much for that talk. I don't know whether you or indeed everybody on this webinar knows that yesterday there was rather an important announcement out of Rome, which is that there's going to be a 3-year synod process involving the whole Catholic Church, so beginning in local dioceses and ending up in October 23 with a synod of bishops in Rome that will gather up all this discernment that's been taking place, this synodal process. It's very exciting and probably the biggest thing, I think, since kind of Second Vatican Council.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, Esther, whether you feel, because I'm very aware that there's a great ignorance in the church about processes of communal discernment and decision making. It's not something we're used to in church because of a certain command and control Catholicism which has dominated the past few centuries. Benedict, of course, has so much in the rule, about processes of decision making and consultation. And I just wonder what you think we, or rather Benedictines and lay Benedictines, can offer the church at this time to help them in their journey of embracing synodality.
Well, as you say, there is so much that is extraordinarily wise and practical and rather surprising to some people in Benedict's decision-making. Very cheering, have the voice of the youngest being listened to.
I think perhaps there's something in there with the structure that he recommends for what seems to be larger communities, that there's deaneries within the community where you have decisions that are delegated to smaller units. I think that's a kind of something that has begun to be modelled in the church, but is actually quite rare, really. Yes, Father Tom, that we need I have to learn to say this word. We need a synodal community at parish level before the diocese or in Rome. Yeah, well, hopefully that's where it's going to start. Yeah.
I was just going to say on Austin's point, I've just finished reading Pope Francis' book, Let Us Dream. And I seem to recall that when he was talking in the book about synodical, about the conference and the gathering, and trying to get the church to work together in a synodical way, which is something which the Church of England has been trying to do for years. But one of the words that Pope Francis mentioned was the word listen. And I think that his idea was that as you gather, you hear each other in respect, you listen. And it's the process of listening, which, rather like in St. Benedict's rule, we listen and we discern. And when we gather together, we listen to the young people and we listen to the wisdom of the elders and we listen to the wisdom of the Spirit. So I think that from gathering from what Pope Francis is saying, that certainly in the Catholic Church, he would encourage this Benedictine process of listening.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you.
Can I throw, while I've got the floor, can I throw in one more question?
Yes, go on, Derek.
I was very interested in how Esther might link Benedictine and Celtic spirituality, because she writes very well on both. And I'm quite interested in how this two comes together.
I think Celtic hospitality is sometimes rather over the top. If you remember that wonderful poem which said, "I would like to have a great lake of beer and see the saints drinking it for all eternity." I think probably, Benedict on hospitality is so brilliant, so wise, and of such practical use in those days when I was living in the deanery, because the Canterbury is the centre of the whole Anglican Communion, and we used to have literally hundreds of people through the house, and to see everyone who comes as Christ made me really feel a respect for them each, but also the fact that he then goes on to say that the life of the community must go on, otherwise the guest will not find anything except emptiness when he and won't find what he came to seek. And so to preserve the family life and the right of the boys to have their own lives was a balancing act, which again I learned entirely from Benedict, so that was very valuable. I don't think that the Celtic and the Benedictine really march together, but I would like to think that that there's refreshment to be found in both.
Thanks, thank you. Jared, you've got your hand up. Have you got a question, Jared?
Don't worry, it's not about ice cream this year.
I did wonder, but carry on, yeah.
No, it's about the cathedral. Like, it's a bit expensive to go into cathedral. I just wonder why it's a bit expensive to go there. Anybody?
The cathedral had it was not when we were there it wasn't paying. Now I think cathedrals rank themselves with great country houses, don't they, virtually, in asking a staggering sum of money. They let you in free if you say you're going to pray there, you know that. That's very important. But there is a lot of upkeep, not only upkeep of crumbling stone, which has to be kept in order, but just the number of people who are employed on the staff roll and the security and the rest of it.
Thanks.
It's a huge, and also the workers, those must be treated with respect and given decent wages, and not in any way made to feel that just because it's a holy job they are going to get a decent wage. So there is a lot of expense concerning keeping the cathedral going.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
They're not making a profit, I don't think.
No,
Adam,
they aren't.
Adam,
I just wanted to take the opportunity to explain that I've been a witness at first hand of Esther being able to say at the end of the day, have I become a more loving person? Because 39 years ago, I don't know if you remember this, Esther, you and I have only met twice. Once, 39 years ago, this week in Canterbury Cathedral, and tonight. In between time, I think you sent me a letter in 1998 because I made a comment about what I'm going to say now, which is that you practice hospitality in a big way to me and to my chums. I was part of the security team looking after the visit of Pope John Paul and the to Canterbury. And every afternoon, about 3 o'clock, 3:30, you would come into my office. Well, my then office, I was given an office, and you would knock on our door and very politely invite us to come to your kitchen, where you produce the most brilliant cakes, hundreds of gallons of tea. We were there for 3 weeks, and I put on about 3 stone because of you. But it made such a terrifying job at the time, most pleasurable. And I just wanted to say thank you. And that day, you became a more loving person.
Well, that's an absolutely amazing greeting. It really is. Thank you. Thank you. That was quite something, undertaking all that, wasn't it?
It was a tremendous job, and the biggest event that took place, which put all of our plans into complete chaos, was about 5 minutes from the end of the visit. The Archbishop was asked by the Pope, could they be on their own in the cloisters? Nobody else could go in there. And of course, we didn't know what to do, but so we let it go on, and they met for 10 minutes completely on their own with nobody around them. That was a beautiful moment.
It was a wonderful moment. A photographer managed to get a glimpse of them and the Archbishop's cloak in a gust of wind just as they went round the corner of the cloisters. Yeah. Yes, it was an amazing, utterly amazing day.
Thank you very much, Esther.
Thank you, Derek. Thank you very much. Adam.
So, just a very quick one, Esther. When you were talking, you talked about the vows. I think you used the word listening always in the place of obedience.
I did, yes.
Could you just elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, the Latin word for listening is obsculta, which means to listen intently. And so I guess in my own mind, and you're quite right to check me on that, because listening is really listening intently and then responding, listening to the voice of God in one's heart, or listening to the word and then responding with a yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
I should at some point have explained my shortcut.
It fits in quite nicely with the first question that I asked you, Esther, because the word obedience sets up all sorts of...
Yes, doesn't it?
It does.
Yes.
It does. Whereas listening, I think it's very, very lovely discovery to hear you use it in that way.
But I think that the 3 vows would appeal enormously to young people. They would be very put off by poverty, chastity, and obedience. All 3 are pretty threatening. Whereas I was trying to say that the 3 vows are really touch one's own psychological self very, very profoundly.
Right. Yes.
Yes. Actually, my name is really Godric Tim. I'm a monk of Dowie, but I've been living up for many years here in Ormskirk in the Archdiocese of Liverpool. And for the last nearly 4 years now, we've been on this synodal journey. And again, one of the keys to the whole process has been listening. So I just thought, I was delighted to hear what Austin said about the forthcoming synod in Rome, But again, St. Benedict has so much to say about the process.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Godric, perhaps you could write something for us, a sort of message from the front line that you've been involved in this process for a while, and the kind of your accumulated insights and
oh my goodness,
and wisdom would be brilliant.
Oh. Well, see what emerges.
Well, Esther, thank you so much, and for putting so much of yourself and your experience into that wonderful talk. It's so much to take away and digest, and so relevant to us as a community and our daily experience. So thank you so much for that.
Well, Michael, thank you for that wonderful introduction, which was wonderfully, gloriously funny. Splendid it was.
Well, it's lovely to see you. And I'll hand back now to Adam.
So thank you very much. Yes, Michael is becoming really well known for his introductions. He's really got the great gift of doing that. So I just want to really thank you, Esther, on behalf of the community for coming and for inspiring us. You've fed us so much with so much insight and food, and I'm sure we'll go away and really meditate on all of what you've said. You did say one thing which I have to rebound on, which is that you're not a member of a community anywhere. You're very welcome always as a member of the lay community, and just so you know that. And
that's wonderful. Oh, that's really wonderful. I'll sign on the spot.
Right. That's wonderful. And we keep you in our thoughts and prayers, and we will go away and try to commit ourselves further to Benedict's way of life, become more loving, and listen. So thank you very, very much, Esther.
Thank you for